We sit down with creators, founders, and entrepreneurs who are shaping tomorrow to get an inside view on how they think, lead, and act, and the struggles that go with it. I'm Nick Hughes, and this is Founders Live Conversations. Today, we have a drink with Peng of WAVCATCHER to get his thoughts on the wireless industry and handling the ups and downs of being a founder.
Hey Nick, how's it going?
Hey Pete, welcome.
Hey, thanks. This is a pretty cool
take
place.
A seat. Take a seat. Yeah, this is the Collective Chemistry Bar.
All right.
This is where they actually have beer.
Oh, check that out.
Yeah.
That's pretty
How about
sick.
That? Cheers.
Yeah.
Welcome.
There you go. Thanks.
Great. Well,
Sorry, that's a first.
That is a first. Wanted to chat with you today. Appreciate you coming out. You're a part of Founders Live. You actually won the ambassador contest that we had a couple months ago. So welcome.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk a little bit about your story, your company.
All right.
But first, I just want to talk about, I'm so glad you're on Founders Live. How did you actually find the community, and how did you get involved with it?
Founders Live, totally through Meetup. I am a hardcore Meetup Eventbrite.
Right.
Look for cool events to attend and saw that you had good stuff to offer. So checked you guys out, and definitely something to look into, for anybody who's a founder, for sure. Got a lot of good content. That's
awesome. And what have you enjoyed thus far? Like the events or the online community, both of them, or what?
I think the people first and foremost, because for me, it's all about relationships, because you want to help people. And what you do is you provide, I don't want to call it a service. You provide a really nice offering that really, it's a cool thing, whether it's in person, whether it's some sort of web event, the way that you handle your online communications, it's pretty cool.
Thanks. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're excited for the future, and we're going to be going to many other cities. Dallas, you're from Dallas, which we'll touch that in a second.
Right.
But what I would like to do is actually have you describe what you're working on, WAVCATCHER.
Yeah.
And then what we're going to do is then go back, after that description, let's go back to the history. How did it start?
Nice.
And then we'll work forward into what you're doing now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
You want to go ahead and start?
Yes.
All right.
What is WAVCATCHER?
WAVCATCHER, we improve signal, right? We specialize in wireless communications, and from moving into smart antenna technology, we actually pivoted to create a case that improves wireless signals, cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. We can make your smartphone better.
So you're saying this is an antenna that actually makes your phone get better signal?
Yeah, that's correct. First of all, it's not a booster. Like boosters,
you hear that all the time.
Right? Yeah, for sure, right? There's a lot of faux stuff out there, and you can't do stuff like that. You got to be honest with people.
Yeah.
What it is, simply, it's a smart antenna. It's a big antenna because the antennas in your devices are very small. So what we've done was we built it into a consumer offering that is very popular. Did a lot of research on it. It's really an antenna that snaps onto your phone, but you can't just stick anything onto your phone. There's a lot of things that you have to design around.
Right.
But that's essentially what it is. It's a super antenna that improves your signal, and by doing so, you get faster streaming, longer battery life, and less drop calls.
So how do you know it works? There's a lot of other stuff out there that might work.
See, that's the hardest thing about qualification, but in some ways it's the simplest, like the try it, buy it philosophy. You got to use it. So I don't like saying you get 50% better coverage or 25%. It's hard to quantify because carriers are all different. You could be in a basement, you could be up on a rooftop or something, or out in the middle of nowhere, and then you have limitations. It's all about using it and how you use it, whether it's cellular or Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, whatever.
Yeah.
So we just tell people, use it for a week, return it. We give you, I think, 90 days, no questions asked return policy. You have to. You got to be fair.
Right. So what I'm a little tripped up on is how does an antenna that I might even put on my phone aftermarket interact with or just with the carrier that I have and the signal that they have maybe in the city, and there's like spots that are dead. Does it improve those spaces, or how does that interact with, like, say, AT&T or T-Mobile?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's kind of twofold, really. Number one is, if you have coverage, you can say, well, I have signal. And that's one of the questions that we get from investors is, all right, I've got great coverage. Everybody's got great coverage. Well, most people will differ. There's a reason why people come up to us for this. If you got great coverage, because of the way it works, better signal means that you'll save power. So yes, you could be under, let's say I got great coverage here. I pull out my case, put it on the phone, or it's already on the phone. Number one is your battery life is going to be saved. You're going to get less lagging. You're going to get better streaming. That's how you'll notice the difference. If you didn't have it, you'll still see it.
Yeah.
But it'll work. But you'll notice the difference, especially in power savings. Tremendous. If you're like further off, and you may have those pockets, and everybody's got a pocket. Everybody does. And you'll know first thing. It's So if you have it, try it no case, snap it on with case.
Right.
That's the magic of the technology for sure.
Interesting. Where did this come from? How did this idea come about? How did you develop the technology? When did you start the company?
Yeah, WAVCATCHER started as Farfield. Farfield was an antenna company. We started as a father-son gig. My father is an amazing person in terms of he's probably the most honest man you know, and you've seen business. Honest men and business don't always work well together.
Yeah.
But as an engineer, he's one of the top in his profession. Patriot Missile, for example, he worked the missile system there.
Oh, wow.
That's his antenna system, or at least his designs for it. That's among his claim to fame, if you will. So on the hierarchy in the defense and aerospace industry, he's at the top. So when he left into, I'd say the 90s, he tried to start his own business, and actually he survived for a very long time. That's how I somehow, after I entered adulthood, I fell into it with him. And that's kind of how we started.
Right. And so when you said you fell into it with him, he clearly had, created the technology or had these ideas and the expertise around antennas. Where did you come into play?
Right. So, believe it or not, I get accused of being an engineer just because I've learned to speak engineer.
Yeah.
But I learned from my coaching background. I started coaching kids. I coached volleyball. Volleyball was my thing. And for a very long time, I thought that's what I was going to do, be a coach, be a teacher. And I also studied advertising. Somewhere all of those things, just the convergence of all these things, and to the point where he was coming out and he was struggling to try to really get some traction, he offered me a position to help him and help the family, and I kind of learned the business. And from there, we were off. And this was pre-Farfield. I learned the business, started with him in a startup for a while, left the business for quite a bit. And then when push came to shove, recently we restarted the business again. And I was in a much more mature place.
Right. Now, what's the next generation of the company? What's the new feature?
Yeah, WAVCATCHER now is focused more on the consumer end game to begin with. We needed to pivot for many different reasons we can explore if time permits. But we somehow fell into the smartphone case game. The question is, can we improve smartphones? How do we improve the mobile experience? Can we do that with our antenna technology? Because it doesn't matter how good your antennas are or your technology is, right? It's all about monetization. Through this whole experience, we've talked with a lot of, from institutional investors to angels, and everyone's different. It's like playing freaking golf. Mm-hmm. They all have a way that you have to hit the freaking ball, but it's all different. But somehow you just got to do what you got to do. And the smartphone case seemed to capture everyone's imagination in terms of it's a value proposition that's universal. Right? Everyone needs better signal because better signal equals better performance.
Right. So what's interesting though is cases are fashion statements, I would say, more than utilitarian. Mm-hmm. Clearly they're protective and they're strong, but will you guys put this technology into the cases that like the 18-year-old girls are carrying, that they're pink or red or blue or whatever?
Yeah, so that's a good question. In our original market research, so the case business, if you look at it, and that's kind of weird for a technology company to enter something consumer-oriented like the case business, $12 billion industry. People aren't aware, like OtterBox, it has about 40% of the market. They're evaluated at $4 billion as a $4 billion plus company. And they don't make pretty cases. They make robust cases.
Right.
So what we did was, based on my connections in the volleyball industry, I don't want to say industry, but with volleyball players, I got a lot of feedback on how to design this thing and what value adds to offer. And we made it very slim and slender. However, even though the case performed in Gen 1, protection was an issue. And a lot of the feedback that we got during market validation had to do with protection. They want to see it drop. That's why people are willing to spend money on bulky cases like OtterBox and LifeProof and now Tech 21.
Well, speaking of dropping phone, when I was doing some research, I went to your website. You have a video on there that someone's throwing the phone at a brick wall.
Yeah, that was fun.
And it hit home because literally the day before 4th of July,
right,
I'm at my apartment. We have a deck. We're about 25 feet above the ground. And I will spare you the details, but my phone fell off the deck and smashed on the ground. And it just like shattered. And weirdly enough, the phone still worked. It could text, it could call, but it was broke. And I didn't have a case on there. So you're saying that caseless, right? So you're saying that your case could have protected that.
Yes. Well, 25
feet is all high.
Yeah, 25 feet, I can't guarantee that. So we've tested it off a staircase about 20 feet onto concrete. And, 25 feet, hey, gravity, it's logarithmically stronger. I don't know. That's getting into science that I just don't quite understand. I fully admit it. But yeah, it would have been pretty good, because the way we've designed it is we've added cushioning. It's your typical cushioning, but without making it super robust. We even put cushion on the inside, kind of like a Nike air sole that we call the wave gel. So because everyone says, what happens if it hits the corners or hits the front? But what happens if it lands flat on its back? So we actually put an inner liner of silicone that adds some shock absorption properties.
So does that actually just kind of dissipate the energy
totally
across, so it's not a focused?
Yeah, it's a dampening effect. It's totally necessary. Different case companies use different materials, and in the case game, the IP is really revolves around the materials. And fortunately, with our strategic partners, we were able to create a case that doesn't get overly large, but yet is mechanically designed to absorb at all the critical areas where it's going to hit. So without a screen protector, you will more likely than not have an issue dropping your case or even throwing it at a brick wall. And we did that to exaggerate the point. I don't know how many people will test it. People may try it and say, return this, but hey, that's just how it is.
Interesting.
Now I'd say the number one pain point, and this is what we found out, is not breaking the phone, it's breaking the screen. Because it's $150 on the average.
That was my experience, right?
Yeah.
But my guess, though, is if I had your case, there would have been quite a bit less damage.
Yes.
Possibly none. Maybe. I don't know. But the whole screen was totally shattered. The device actually was very much intact. There was no other damage outside of the screen.
So in our original released X1 case for the iPhone 6XS, we thought we were ready to go to market. So we did a limited release to a lot of millennials, to a lot of teenagers, and even to people who work out in the workplace. And then the number one pushback we got was not that the phone didn't work. Actually, we got a lot of compliments on our Wi-Fi, to be honest with you. The struggle was screen protection, and even some of our personal testers early on, like something as simple as the phone dropping, if you catch it at a bad angle on a certain surface, it could crack the screen. It's just about physics and where you connect, and we were having issues. So we actually recalled all of those things. We actually replaced a lot of, I don't want to say a lot for us is maybe over a half dozen of cracked screens, but that adds up. So we realized we need to release this generation. We included screen protectors to go along with it. But we also learned, because of Gen 2, which is what we're doing now, how to design the case to make it more robust. But that in turn affects the antenna performance, because to take the antenna, to make it work with the materials, and then identify where to capture the energy to re-radiate the coverage, that's very difficult. Right. But that's where our patents come in.
Interesting. So what's the end game for WAVCATCHER?
End game for WAVCATCHER is, our goal is to, I don't want to say we're attacking just the case market. The case market is more a means to an end, which is to allow us to quickly monetize and to validate our technology. I mean, anyone can take an antenna, plug it into something with a cable. The fact that we can take a super antenna, capture the energy through inductive coupling. And we do a lot of links on the website, by the way, that help inform anyone who happens to explore our website and want to learn more about how this works. Inductive coupling is about just capturing the energy, and a lot of it has to do with spacing and footprint. If you do any of those things wrong, or have the wrong materials, like carbon, for example, is an RF scatter. Most people don't know that. That's why you can't just throw an antenna in a black case. It better be carbon-free. So things like that all matter into the intellectual properties and the design of the case. I mean, it could be kind of the boring stuff, but that's kind of how it works.
Right. So, so when you're saying, it's not just an antenna or it's not just a case, what would you say is the next phase of WAVCATCHER from a business and strategic point of view?
That's a great question, and I would say the Qualcomm Intel model and even the Ruckus Wireless model. So if we get it into the business model of things, the case business is a subset, right? It's a sector of sorts. It's a product, but ultimately, we need to be known for a WAVCATCHER antenna or antenna system or chipset or something similar. Whatever WAVCATCHER, just like an Intel or Qualcomm or however you market it, that will make your product better. So we don't necessarily have to brand the product to be WAVCATCHER, whether it's white label, licensing, or depending on how we design and develop it with our partners. That's really the long-term plan. The case, however, validates that we can do this, right? The design and development of the product, the fact that we can marry the two, or you can take an antenna, put it on an object without plugging it in through a cable, that shows that we have the engineering and the technology to help other people improve their products.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, I want to shift gears now and really talk about what it's like to be a founder and even maybe the psychological aspects of it.
Right.
So, first of all, what actually attracted you to be a founder? Did you see it as a challenge that you wanted to overcome, or were you just drawn to it just from because your father or whatever? How did you get into it?
Founder by circumstance. That's all there is to it. I don't have any pride when it comes to who makes the decisions. I've just seen him, my father, get in a lot of bad scenarios. Or at least, I don't want to say bad. That's not fair to some of his partners. It has to do with not ideal scenarios. It never seems to be a fair deal. So by becoming a founder and controlling the destiny of the business, and honestly I couldn't do this 10 years ago, just the cumulative knowledge and experience. That's basically it. But a lot of it, strangely enough, if it wasn't for my coaching volleyball experience, and I was fairly good at it, at least the feedback says I was.
Yeah.
High school, college, that's a big deal. That basically helped me with the organizational tools that allowed me to be hopefully a successful founder.
So your first experience from coaching kind of led you into more what you would call leadership, and you realized organization leadership, and then it led you into a founder role.
Yes.
And you're CEO, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So how do you embrace the CEO role and the leader role? Maybe even especially if it's still with your father, which the dynamic there is interesting. But any thoughts on, maybe if there's other founders that are watching this, the CEO role is challenging and it has a lot of pressures. So how do you handle that?
You are honest with your team, but honestly, you protect your team. And what I mean by that, fortunately, the father-son dynamic in this case is a little different. My father is a little bit older, so we use him for situational development in terms of he's an expert at what he does. It's my job to think of the product and market and solutions and to try to find a way to monetize and to provide the vehicle to put the technology into. So there's a lot of research involved. My marketing background helps me with that. My relationships with people help us move that along, but no person is an island. But there has to be a certain stubbornness. I see a lot of founders, they think it's easy. I'm going to make a startup, there's things like what? If you go out on your own, I can go out and I have 3 months put away. No.
Good luck.
Yeah, especially when we came out, I didn't expect to get back into technology. I mean, I was a graphic designer a long time ago. I just thought I'd be able to do some design jobs, start my own little agency, whatever. And then together, because it's a family thing. It's about finishing what he started. Then there is no failure. I had a vice president once. He was my mentor, and he told me. And by the way, mentors are totally important. Mm-hmm. I am what I am because of the people that I've been fortunate enough to have crossed my path.
Right.
But yeah, he said it's like Cortez. I believe that's the person he subscribed to. It's like Cortez said, burn the boats. Yeah. So there's no way to go back, right? And there really isn't.
Well, and that's an interesting segue to the concept of failure. So you're saying they're essentially burn the boats. You're not even acknowledging failure. It's all forward progress. But what happens if you hit that stall point? What happens if you're looking around saying, is this working or not?
It's total feast or famine. When we raised the money and we planned it out and even signed on for our next round, things were good. But when things like the money, or at least for the next round, doesn't come in, then what do you do? And even though you may see it coming and you plan for it, nothing's guaranteed.
Right.
And doesn't matter how well you prep for it. How stubborn are you going to be? And sometimes by burning the boats, so the best answer I can give you is I heard that a Navy SEAL commander, and I'm stealing this from someone, he says anytime there's a problem, he says, thank you, God, for the opportunity.
Right.
And that's all it is, because actually some of our best decisions, like our decisions to pivot to the case, we were flat into a wall. There's no money coming in. There's no second job. There's basically try to find a solution. It hurts. And what are you willing to do? What is your pride willing to give up? Yeah. There is no pride in being a founder unless you are fortunate to be in a situation that the money just keeps rolling in and life is good. But I think that's rare. It
is rare. But it also, from personal experience as well as I'm around many different founders now and seeing a lot of stories and a lot of early stage companies that might end up pivoting and finding the fit. I think the key is keeping expenses and burn down low enough to survive long enough.
That's right.
To find the fit and the customers. And sometimes your first initial market that you're trying to serve is not the one that you're going to end up ultimately serving. But I do think between A and B being the landed customer and the market fit,
right, that's
the Death Valley. And what everyone's searching for is, how do you get through that? I have my thoughts, but I'm curious of like, is there something maybe you experienced it is like, what one or two things that you might have experienced that you did that kept things going to the point where you at least got some traction?
So Bootstrap, right? The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, I think.
Yeah.
All of these things are wonderful, but in reality, most startups rely on funding, right? You take a concept and you try to receive funding. But in hindsight, if I could, I would have tried to create as many revenue opportunities. And we kind of, in our situation, we were a little different because we did start as an engineering company, and we got a tier 1 carrier interested in us, and we got accepted for design and development, but they wouldn't pay us. So that led us to go into the whole seek capital. So how do you bootstrap? No, you go to your friends and family, your seed planning, and then you stretch it out, you bootstrap it. And then when we did pivot and we did receive money to follow our budgetary guideline, where you hire employees, so you don't have to do everything yourself, so everything is done correctly, the burn increases. But sadly, you got to keep that going, and the only way to keep that going is to generate revenue. You can't rely on funding, and I think too many people count on, I'm going to make a seed round, I'm going to get C2 or A.
No, you can't do it.
No, I think monetize as soon as possible. And a friend of mine at AT&T, he had a son, I want to call him a friend, he's a good guy, and he was trying to get us to the right people at AT&T. And he asked, I'd like to pick your brain sometime for my son. What would you recommend? And the first thing I thought of was, if I had to do this all over again, I would have ran an e-commerce platform. I would have just said, buy t-shirts and learn basic business, right? You got inventory, you got goods.
Yeah.
How do you market and sell it? How do you differentiate yourself? And I said, I'd tell every person to start their own e-commerce company. Just understand buy, sell, and basic business, and transaction, and marketing. And that's what I've learned in hindsight. Everything that you read about, you study, it's great in theory, but in application, you don't know how the market, we haven't even been attacked yet by competitors. No, everything is circumstantial. And I think how we respond to these circumstances really decide if your business is going to survive or not.
So a question that hits my mind, and I think it's a very interesting one, kind of a crazy, weird one, but is there a time that you got just like kicked in the face, just like the customer or investor or market just was bam, and you had to respond, and you actually had to survive that blow, that kick to the face? Is there a story there that you can share with us?
I think the simplest story is it happened last fall, where we had the documents signed for our second round of $750,000. For example, LifeProof went to market with $2 million roughly. Let's say $1 million to build, $1 million to sell. We did it for $550 to build and to try to sell, but our $750 would enable us to do that. That's just the right way to go, to make sure you have enough money to grow the product or to get traction. We didn't get that. What do? Got a team to feed. Had to let people go. That's hard. And we didn't have a big staff, but we had to do it. But you had to start cutting costs. And then I actually stepped back as a CEO. I was introduced to somebody else who had successfully exited a startup. And she was amazing. She was very successful at what she did, very analytical, very, very good at identifying issues. And market validation, she's an expert at that. She was very good at being very conservative and cautious and making sure we're following the right roadmap. And she was well connected in Dallas. But 4.5 months later, 5 months, she stepped back. Didn't see that coming because love her to death, but it just kind of came back to me. And I'm like, okay, because I had stepped back. She had me more of a COO/marketing role. But even though I was the founder and the chairperson, I didn't, if you give somebody a leadership position, let them run with it. And that was the blow right there. So now here we are. We didn't get the money that we thought we'd raise. Yes, we bootstrapped to this point, but we still haven't sold product yet. And that's where we were. And and right now we're now digging ourselves out of that. We have product. We're looking at Kickstarter. We have some investors who are ready to put money in, it looks like, within the next 30, 60 days. So it's easy for me to smile and talk about it, but realistically, there is heartache, and there is. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say I was all happy, joy. I'm going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
You do have to sometimes just, you dwell, analyze, go through the emotional stuff. And for me, I don't get overly emotional, but yeah, sometimes you feel really alone because you don't want to pass that burden to your teammates.
And what do you find helps you get through that? Like, what do you find that ways to cope with the challenges of being a founder? Because they're way more immense than if you have a job at a company that you're not the CEO or the one that's actually responsible of the entire company. How do you deal with that when you are sitting there saying, is this actually going to even continue?
I liken it to faith. I actually do count on my faith a lot. I'm probably not as good as I should be regarding faith. As a practicing Christian, I will say that. I rely on that. Yeah. And because I don't want to say everything happens for a reason, but when things are good and the door's open, it may be because you're on the right track. Now, I'll be honest, even though the timing we didn't receive the funding, I think the lessons learned from that are good. There's nothing wrong with getting to a low point. You hear founders saying, I failed, I learned from the failures. Right. And there's a lot of truth to that. But to them, they're able to get money and start another company. Now, there is no crash this company. I have an obligation to my family, to my friends, to the people who put money in. And the fact that, I don't care if it's a penny. I don't care if it's $1 million. They put money in. I owe them that more than anything else. Yeah. So there is no going back. And as a founder, I take it very personal, but you can get a heart attack from doing all that. Mm-hmm. So you have to rely on faith. You try to decompress. Tim Ferriss, great example. I don't like pushing someone else's podcast, but he has one podcast, Brian Johnson, who sold Braintree for $800 million. Yeah. Brian Johnson talks about the tribulations of a founder better than anyone and what to do. So if there's anything to recommend, I would go listen to his podcast. Brian Johnson, good guy. I mean, he sold money. He had to sell stuff in the merchant industry, right, like credit card stuff, and that's hard. Yeah.
It's interesting you bring that up. That I would close by saying that there's a lot of resources out in the community. Someone might find some stuff on Founders Live around this, but I think like when you look at Tim Ferriss, you look at, I'll push the Reboot podcast because I actually think so. Reboot podcast is Jerry Colonna, and he and his crew put together such amazing content around this exact challenge, which is the psychological and emotional and spiritual issues that founders struggle with.
Right.
And pretty much every week they've got a new podcast with a guest on there that is describing a different problem, and I find myself listening and saying, like I've got the same issues, or oh my gosh, or I will come back to this podcast the moment I have these issues. And so this type of stuff is so valuable, and that's why we were talking about this. It's not like we're talking about, hey, you got covered in XYZ media, website or blog or whatever. We're talking about some of the challenges that we all founders have, and how do we cope with it? Because that's going to lead to success, not coverage in media. It's actually how do we emotionally and psychologically come to grips with this is a challenging problem, but we're going to overcome it.
So that's why I love Founders Live. And I think we mentioned this before. Like I said, it was kind of like a combination of things, and you take the best out of everything. But since I mentioned Brian Johnson mentioned about getting founders together who actually live it, and because founders don't want to let their families down, right? So they won't share everything with them, and that in turn can fracture a family a little bit. But founders, when you get together, we all have the same problems, sufferings. Most of it's monetary, but not always, right? And to have that group, it's almost like AA, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm a founder. It's been my 25th day. Oh my God. Yes, hi Pete, right? That's what Founders Live is. I mean, we acknowledge the fact that, hey, we're all there, and you're creating something for them, not just a resource. Like, we want you to be successful, but I think there is a certain personality trait that, and I don't want to call it a flaw, but I call it a drive.
I call it is a disease.
Yeah.
And it's a great disease. Yeah. And I think anyone that has this is blessed because they're looking at the world, creating value, trying to better themselves and better the world.
You just said it, better the world.
Yeah.
Because I don't care what type of technology you have, whatever. If you're not doing it to improve the world, and that's how I was able to reconcile, how do we move the technology? How do we create something to make something better for other people, and in turn better the world? So thank you for summarizing that.
You're welcome, and thank you for being here. We're out of time.
Oh man.
But welcome. Glad to chat with you.
Yeah, for
Thanks
sure.
for the beer. And
no, thank you for the beer, for sure.
So cheers.
Yeah, for sure.